And welcome back, rugby fans, to Rugby411. As always, I'm your host. My name is Joshua Shibata, and this is Week 17 Power Rankings of the MLR 2023 season, the penultimate week of the regular season. Just one more week left. To be honest, a lot of things have been decided when it comes to the playoff picture. But man, I don't think there's been a week where there has been more movement of the teams. Literally, this power ranking board has been almost completely changed around because of all the action that happened this last week. It was an exciting week of rugby. Like I said, pretty much all the playoff spots have been decided except for one minor. Trying to figure out who will host the Eastern Conference semifinal match. Otherwise, all 6 spots have technically been decided. All 6 teams in the playoffs have been decided. It literally did come down to the wire on a couple games. It was super, super excited. Again, a lot of teams have been switched around. There's been some surprises. It's been a really exciting season, and it has come down to the wire. Week 18 is going to be kind of, there will be some exciting games, but just depending on what the rosters look like, because things have been decided, it could be kind of a lackluster Week 18. But, really no different when you look at sports like pro football here in America or American football, where the final week of the season ends up being kind of a soft week as teams are getting ready to make that final playoff push. And if anything, as I've mentioned numerous times when it comes to rugby, it is a season of attrition. It really depends on what teams have the healthiest rosters going into the playoffs. And certain teams, like your reigning defending MLR champions, the New York Ironworkers, who looked like they were limping along during the midseason, are looking like they're getting everybody prime, healthy, ready to come back just in time for that playoff push. But let's start at the bottom, and unfortunately a team that has been pretty much seated in that 12 spot. They'll probably be that way for the remainder of the season, which is only one more week. The Toronto Arrows sit at number 12 after being slaughtered by arguably the best team in the league, the San Diego Legion, 50-17. Honestly, it was an interesting game. Toronto tied the game, literally. They tied the game in the 30th minute and actually took the lead going into the halftime, 17-7. But then in the second half, it was all San Diego. I'll go a little bit more into that when we talk about San Diego at the other end of the power ranking board. 7 tries in the second half to basically give San Diego the win. They pulled away 50-17. Toronto, unfortunately, it really has been for the most part just a season where it ended up becoming just to see what players might make the national Canadian team for the Canadian pro rugby team. Toronto kind of limped along for the remainder of the season. Hopefully, maybe next year they'll come back into form. Moving on. Dropping down a couple of spots, probably the lowest they've been this entire season. Rugby ATL, after losing to Rugby New York, as I mentioned before, the New York Ironworkers, 39-24. It was actually a pretty back and forth game. And Rugby ATL actually looked like they had a spot to kind of take the lead. Unfortunately, a try by Waitokia was called back due to kind of controversial obstruction. If you look at the replay, I don't know if really there was obstruction being had at that point, but unfortunately that was the call that took away a try. It was interesting in this game. It was very, very chippy. New York actually had 4 yellow cards called on them in the game, but despite that, they were able to hold on New York, I'll go a little bit more into detail about the accolades for New York when we talk about New York. But really, there was a lot of self-inflicted wounds for Atlanta, even though New York did commit 4 yellow cards. Atlanta tried really hard to take advantage of it, but ended up only scoring 1 try out of those 4 yellow cards. So in the end, Atlanta just not enough firepower to take down Rugby New York. Like I mentioned before, New York had a lot of their players come back from injury, so they are looking like a very, very tough team going into the playoff push. So ATL dropping a couple of spots down to number 11, also dropping down a couple of spots. Unfortunately, Dallas Shackles moving back down into the bottom 4 after a couple of weeks sitting at the number 8 position. Unfortunately, losing a heartbreaker game once again to NOLA Gold, 10-15. Man, it was really close. Dallas got into the game, especially after there was a yellow card advantage for NOLA. That allowed them to get within 5 points. Dallas had the chance to tie the game with going into the overtime. They had a chance to tie. Unfortunately, right at the goal line, the ball fell out of the Dallas player and it became a knock-on, ending the game. Like I said, Dallas losing a heartbreaker to NOLA, allowing them to slide down. They do have a shot, though. It's going to be very interesting. The last game of the season for Dallas goes against the new kids on the block, Chicago. It'll be interesting to see who wins that game. I'll tell you my predictions on that in the next video, but Dallas drops a couple spots. Also dropping a couple spots from the number 6 position to number 9. Old Glory DC losing pretty lopsided loss to the Houston SaberCats, 7-31. Honestly, it never looked like DC was in the game. It was Houston all the way. I'll go again into a little bit of more on the Houston side when I get to Houston. But a shocker for me, I really felt that Old Glory would put up more of a fight. But unfortunately, they ended up losing. With that win, though, it allowed Houston secure themselves a playoff spot, especially because then Utah ended up losing their game. And we'll talk about that, with the next team getting their second win in franchise history. The new kids on the block, the Chicago Hounds, pulling off the upset victory, defeating the Utah Warriors 26-24. Man, the Chicago Hounds, their season has been all about close games. And as you know in sports is that, sometimes the ball will bounce your direction, sometimes it won't. This time, it bounced in the way of Chicago. Chicago getting their second win of the season. Upset over Utah in Utah, 26-24, allowing them to slide up from number 11 into number 8. Let's go a little bit more into that game. It was really a very, very close game. Utah took the lead with 10 minutes left after a try from Lance Williams. As I mentioned before, and has been mentioned numerous times, Chicago always looks competitive until the 60-minute mark. The last 20 minutes, usually Chicago falls apart, and looked like that in this game. But in the end, Julian Dominguez, who was on fire, he had a hat trick in this game, scores his 3rd try, and with the conversion kick by Matina, honestly, that was going to be the make or break. The game was tied at that point, 24-24. Chicago had a heartbreak a couple of weeks ago where Luke Carty was going to make the possible winning penalty, the winning conversion kick. He ended up missing it. In the end, Chris Matina scores the winning conversion kick and allows Chicago to get the win, 26-24. Very, very impressive play by Chicago. And again, it was their second win in franchise history, allows them to move up to the number 8 spot. With that loss, unfortunately, with that loss by Utah and the win of Houston over Old Glory, that allowed Houston to secure the final playoff spot in the Western Conference, Utah ended up losing out in the playoffs this season. Tough loss for Utah, who actually started looking like the better team, but ended up Houston securing that win, that playoff spot with the win over Old Glory. Chicago defeating Utah eliminates Utah from the playoff spot. Like I mentioned, next week it's going to be very interesting. Chicago will go against Dallas. Both teams have 2 wins in franchise history. One of them possibly will get their 3rd win unless it's a tie. And we've had a couple ties already this season. But congratulations to Chicago moving out of the bottom 4 into the number 8 spot. Moving up a couple spots themselves, mentioned before, NOLA Gold with their very close victory over the Dallas Jackals, 15-10. In that game for NOLA, really not a lot to say. To be honest, the game was kind of lackluster. 15-10, low-scoring game. NOLA got very lucky that they didn't allow Dallas to possibly tie or win the game. Dallas ended up fumbling at the goal line for a knock-on, securing the win for NOLA, and they moved up a couple spots. Utah is the next team, dropping down from the top 4 to 6. I was debating about dropping them a little bit more, but considering they only lost to Chicago by a couple points, very big upset. It was shocking, especially because it was in Utah and at Zion Fields. A tough place to beat Utah in. Utah's really good at home, but Chicago was able to pull it off. Big shout out for Utah to Hodgson's, who has been a phenomenal player for Utah, coming from Premiership Rugby to America for MLR in his first season. He was able to break the 100-point barrier, getting 107 points. He was 3 for 3 off of the tee, as well as a try in this game for 14 points total. Phenomenal play. Unfortunately, just not enough for Utah to get the win, but a very, very good performance by a couple of their key players. Moving on, mentioned before, number 5 spot, moving up a couple spots, your reigning defending MLR champions, the New York Ironworkers, defeating Rugby ATL 39-24. To be honest, that game was really a back and forth game for the most part until about the last 10 minutes. Like I said before, it was very, very chippy. New York committed a lot of penalties, 4 flags in the game. But despite all that, they were able to come off with their win. A lot of big key plays from a lot of key players in Rugby New York. Brooklyn Hardiker, a former LA Guiltinis member, very young player, very promising career. He had a brace in this game. Dylan Fawcett scored his 39th career try, which allowed him to now hold the overall most tries scored in all of Major League Rugby. He broke the tie with Rickett Hatting from Seattle. So now, congratulations to you, Dylan the Butcher Fawcett. 39 tries, the most tries scored by any player in all of Major League Rugby history. Also, shout out to New York. Emery. Jason Emery was phenomenal in this game. 14 points, 1 try, 4 out of 5 off of the tee. Phenomenal play. Now, here's where it gets the only deciding factor. With this win, New York was able to eliminate Rugby ATL from the playoffs. New York secured the final spot in the Eastern Conference, along with Old Glory, and of course the most dominating team in the Eastern Conference, the New England Free Jacks. But here's the thing. The only thing that has not been decided is who gets to host that Eastern semifinal game. Is it going to be New York? Is it going to be Old Glory? The way it's going to be decided is that Old Glory has to defeat Rugby ATL in the final game of the season next week with a bonus point victory. If they're able to do that, New York then has to at least get a losing bonus point in order to secure home field advantage for that semifinal game with Old Glory. If New York loses in their game against Utah, Old Glory will get the home field. And Old Glory wins with a bonus point, then they will get the home field advantage. If Old Glory loses, New York, they don't have to do anything. They automatically get the home field advantage. So, Couple of things that to play out. The advantage for New York is the fact that Old Glory and Atlanta play on Saturday. New York will get to figure out what they have to do when they play on Sunday. So all the pressure on Old Glory. Once again, Old Glory has to win with a bonus point to be in contention to possibly host their semifinal game with New York. If they do, New York has to get at least a losing bonus point, meaning they have to be within 7 points of their loss to Utah or get 4 tries in their game. Any of those two are doable, but it's going to be a pretty interesting game. So again, those are the only things left to decide in the final week. Everything else has been pretty much secure for the playoffs. Moving on into the top 4. Houston, as I mentioned before, defeating Old Glory DC pretty dominantly. Very good, strong performance by them. 31-7. With that win and with Utah's loss to the Chicago Hounds, Houston secures the final 3rd spot in the Western Conference. They, in their game against Old Glory, as I mentioned before, it was pretty much all Houston. Christian Dyer had a great game. He had a brace in that game. Also, big shout out to the Flying Fijian Solomanoe for Tiki Solomanoe for Houston, who allowed Houston to get their bonus point try in the game. Great performance by Houston over Old Glory DC, who I was shocked. I thought Old Glory DC would do a lot better. Now, here's where it gets a little interesting. Our game of the week. First of all, I'll put the number. We know who the number 1 team is, but I'll talk about them when we get to them. But the game of the week was between the number 2 and the number 3 teams. So the number 1 team in the Eastern Conference, the New England Free Jacks, the number 2 team in the Western Conference, the two-time MLR champions, the Seattle Seawolves. A great matchup. Could have gone either way. In the end, New England really proved their dominance in this game. Shocking because it was in Starfire Stadium. Not an easy place to beat Seattle. The performance was really phenomenal. So obviously I moved them up to number 2. I really had to think really long and hard whether or not to slide Seattle further down from the number 3 spot, because the score was 34-26. But man, New England really looked good in the game. Seattle looked really just worn down, which is shocking because they were at home. New England had to travel across the country, and they looked like a world beater. Honestly, I really do feel Seattle has a good shot of being in the MLR championship. But man, if they play the New England that New England played this last weekend, Seattle doesn't have a shot to become the three-time MLR champions. It's going to be New England because New England looked phenomenal. I'm going to get in the game. It was very back and forth for a while. Then Paula Balacana for the New England Free Jacks scored his 13th try of the season, putting them in 2nd, right behind blanking on who has the most tries. Right behind Joe Mono. Sorry about mute. I'm sure a bunch of fans are screaming, Joe Mono! But right behind Joe Mono. But big shout out to Paula Balacana for his 13th try of the season. Despite all that, man, it really was all New England. The nail in the coffin was a try by rookie for New England, Etrin Fryer. So shout out to you, Etrin, for your first try in your MLR career, as well as your debut cap for MLR. That try allows New England to go ahead of Seattle with the win. Like I said, New England looked like a world beater in this game, and very impressive. Man, I am honestly, I really do feel, especially when we start talking about the number 1 team, San Diego, who put a 50 on Toronto. Man, a couple weeks ago, I would have told you that San Diego or Seattle were the heavy favorites to win it all. New England could easily walk away with the MLR Shield. Let's talk about San Diego one more time. The most dominant team in the league. 50 points dropped onto Toronto. Granted, it is Toronto, but it should be that way, right? The top team puts that many points on the bottom team. 7 tries in the second half after the game was pretty competitive. Toronto was up 17-7, didn't score a point in the second half. Thomas Aoki scored 2 tries in the game, and then it was just everybody was able to score a lot of points for San Diego. So San Diego with the victory, securing themselves the Western Conference title as well as, at least the number 1 seed, as well as the bye going into the playoffs. They will host the Western Conference Championship between either Houston and Seattle. Seattle will host Houston for the Western semifinals, and then San Diego will host the winner of that. New England, of course, has the Eastern Conference bye, as well as securing home field advantage for the Eastern Conference Championship. But that's our board right there, guys. Again, a lot of moving parts. Only teams that pretty much stayed the same as San Diego and Toronto. Everybody else moved at least a couple of spots. Most, I think, we've had since the beginning of the season. But man, what an exciting week it was of MLR action. And still, like I said, there's a couple of things to play for. New York and Old Glory will be the interesting teams to watch for Week 18. Now, let's go over the Super Brew results, and they were very interesting as well. Not a lot of people got things right because there were quite a few upsets, including the Chicago one, but let's put up the results. Bam! And congratulations, James A6117 for the Golden Cap. I think it might have been your second time that you won this. Correct me if I'm wrong. 6.33 points gets him the week in the Golden Cap. Coming in second, very close, Jules EGW with 5.33 points. Mr. Rugby in third with 5.25. MSWFC 83, Matt with 5. And Villa Farrell 4.83, rounding out the top 5. In the bottom, the wooden spoon, shockingly, John Hawkins, man. John is usually always on the top, or at least in the top 5. But hey, we all have a bad week. Don't worry about it, John. I came in very close behind you, so or in front of you. So, I shouldn't really be talking. Now, let's go over the more important results, the overall weekly results. Bam! And still in first place, MSDRFC 83, Matt with 113.83 points. Quite possibly could secure himself the victory. It will maybe come down to this final week because right behind him is SD Cal Guy, 107.33 points, 6.5 points behind MSDRFC 83. So really it could come down to this final week. Right behind them, Jahego, correct me if I'm wrong with that, 102.49 points. Because of his great performance this week, going up a spot, James A6117 in fourth, 100.73. And then going up a spot because I believe he won the Golden Cap last week, BT Woodrow, 98.33. So again, it's probably going to come down to Matt, MSDRFC 83, and SD Cal Guy. Maybe Jahego could possibly make his way to the top, but those two will be fighting for that Major League Rugby t-shirt of their choice from me. So, those are the results. Again, it's a very interesting power rankings we have. New England definitely has been looking like a world beater. San Diego has been as well. These two could be on a collision course for themselves. And then, of course, you do see some of the top teams near the top. The shocker one would be Old Glory being so far below, even though they've secured themselves a playoff spot. But we still have a week left. We still have a week left, and things could still change depending on how that turns out. But either way, thank you very much as always for watching my video. Let me know in the comments below what you think about my rankings and if they coincide with yours. And as always, I'll see you on the pitch.